Hello, Jeahn here with Luma University, and today I wanted to talk about why big bokeh is potentially ruining your photos. The first reason to not opening your aperture all the way is for image quality, and there's a few different things within that I want to uncover. So the first thing that I want to talk about is something called color fringing. Now, color fringing is what happens when light has to refract through the most extreme angles of a lens, which are found on the outside parts of the element. So when you have your aperture wide open, you're allowing the light from the very edges of the glass to be refracted and hit your sensor, which means that that glass, if it's not extremely high quality, will bend the light in a way that kind of splits the spectrum. So you will get what's called color fringing, which means that you might see, especially in high contrast scenes like shooting through leaves or something like that, and backlit scenes, you might get a green or a magenta color fringe. So if I show you this lens up close, I'm gonna step out of the mic here, so apologies. And you can see completely through the lens right now. That's from edge to edge of the actual lens element. But if I go ahead and turn the aperture ring to close it down, you can see that light is no longer allowed to come through from those elements because it's restricted to the center of the glass. That means it's going to reduce the extreme refraction angle coming in from the edge and only allow the nice crisp center refractions to come through and hit the sensor. And that has a couple of other benefits as well. So another really cool part about closing your aperture down a little bit is that it provides a better sharpness in your image up to a certain extent, and that gets into diffraction, but we'll cover that in a different video sometime in the future. But basically, when you stop down even just a little bit, you're helping your lens to see only the best parts of the glass, which makes the light captured onto the sensor sharper, more detailed, and less distorted. And there's a couple other benefits like I mentioned. So the next benefit is that you reduce vignetting, meaning that if you have your aperture wide open, there is sometimes potential for a shadow to enter the edge of the lens and cause kind of a darkening on the outside, especially if you have filters on or a lens hood that's a little bit tight. This stopping down will reduce the vignetting because you're not capturing the widest parts and letting that shadow bleed into the light elements. So that's another benefit. And the third part about the quality part of this whole thing is that you can eliminate concentric circles. So what are concentric circles? Well, you may have heard them called onion rings. And basically what onion rings are is, especially with glass that wasn't polished extremely well, kind of more affordable glass, you will see in your autofocus areas some uneven exposure that look like onion rings. So here's an example where you can see that the onion ring is pretty extreme and that bokeh ball just kind of looks garbly and crunchy. If you stop down a little bit, even on a cheap lens, that onion ringing will improve. It may not be perfect, but it will get better, and the farther you stop down, the smaller the bokeh will be. So that's the gist for image quality, and for most average viewers, it doesn't really matter, so don't let that stop you from shooting wide open if that's what your creative intention is, but I just want you to be aware you will technically get better quality, usually by stopping down a couple of stops, especially with extremely wide aperture lenses. A second reason to not shoot wide open all of the time is to improve your autofocusing abilities. If your aperture is so wide open that your depth of field is really tiny, your camera should be able to obtain focus fairly quickly, but the accuracy might be off by just a centimeter or two. And it's actually really common, especially in portrait photography, for the camera to get focus on an eyelash rather than the iris. And that can be a problem for portrait photographers who want extremely crispy irises because that is the most important part. So say you're running an 85mm lens that can shoot at f1.4. Well, if you stop down to f2.8, then you're getting even crisper quality, but at the same time, you're allowing a little more forgiveness in your depth of field for the autofocus to be able to get your eyelash and the iris in focus more often, so you're not wasting as many shots. Now again, it depends on if that is your creative intention. If you really want that shallow depth of field, you'll just have to deal with all of the out of focus shots. But the point is that if you stop down, it'll also help you improve your autofocus functionality. So the third thing is isolating your subject. Now, of course, Beginner photographers, and I was definitely huge on this when I first started, they really like to open their aperture all the way because it makes it easy to separate their subject from the background. You don't have to think about composition as much. You don't have to think about, intersecting lines and things that make things feel uncomfortable, because you just open up your aperture, blow out the background, and that's it. And honestly, in certain circumstances, it's nice to have that ability because you can't control your shooting environment. But the mature photographer will take their time, slow down, and think, how much of the background, how much of the environment do I want to include? Do I want it to be completely sharp, slightly blurry, extremely blurry? Where do you draw that line? And a really thoughtful photographer will take more time to consider their depth of field. So the whole point of this video is to just encourage you to think a little bit more than just opening up your aperture all the way, especially if you are a new photographer. It's easy to just crank it wide open, get yourself a nifty 50 and call it a day. And honestly, that does work for a while, but at some point, to become a better photographer and to really understand how to make great compositions, you'll want to start closing your aperture down a little bit to get a little bit more control over your creative outcome. If you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps YouTube recommend the video to more photography enthusiasts like you so that we can build a bigger community. And don't forget to subscribe and click the notification bell so that you don't miss any future uploads. Again, I have a few coming out very soon in just a few days, so definitely stay tuned for that. And remember, I have a very valuable portrait lighting guide waiting for you at lumauniversity.com to kickstart your journey in the captivating world of light. So thanks for tuning in. I'll catch you in the next one.